Scary telling. Back in the day, my grandpa used to go to the nearby town from his village for various purposes, leaving early in the morning and returning by night. The town was about 15 kilometers from the village, and the rural areas were not much electrified. Through the outskirts and the fields, it got difficult to see the path and reach the village after it got dark. One particular evening, as my grandpa was returning home, he noticed a strange figure following him from a distance. At first, he thought it might be just his imagination playing tricks on him, but as he continued to walk, the figure got closer and closer. My grandpa quickened his pace, but the figure kept following him relentlessly. The closer the figure got, the more my grandpa realized that it was not a human but something far more sinister. As he walked, he noticed that the figure was taking the same turns as him, and the feeling of dread and terror was growing inside him. He could feel the cold breath of the entity on his neck, and its presence was suffocating. My grandpa tried to run, but it was no use. The figure was too fast, and it seemed to be enjoying the chase. He could feel its eyes on him, watching his every move, and he knew that he was in grave danger. As he reached the outskirts of the village, he saw a group of villagers gathered around a bonfire. He ran towards them, hoping to find refuge, but as he got closer, he noticed that they were all staring at him with blank, soulless eyes. He tried to run past them, but they all reached out to grab him, their hands cold as ice. My grandpa was trapped, and the only thing he could do was to pray for his life. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, and everything went black. When he woke up, he was lying on the ground, alone and disoriented. From that day on, my grandpa never went out after dark, and he never spoke of the incident to anyone. However, as he grew older, he started to have nightmares about the figure that had chased him that night. He would wake up in the middle of the night, covered in cold sweat, and feeling like something was watching him. The nightmares continued for years, and my grandpa never found peace. Years later, as my grandpa was on his deathbed, he called me over and whispered to me, "Do not venture out after dark, for the figure that chased me that night still roams the outskirts, waiting for its next victim." I never forgot my grandpa's words, and to this day, I never go out after dark. The memory of his encounter with the figure still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, waiting for its next victim. It has happened to me when I was in first year of my B.Tech in 2008. It was my first semester in the institute, and I was leaving for college to attend annual Viva exam. I recently started driving a two-wheeler, and I was always extra cautious whenever someone sat behind me. Especially, it was difficult for me to balance the two-wheeler when a woman sat wearing a sari, as they don't keep their legs across while wearing saris. My college was in my hometown and just 3 kilometers away from my home. It was the month of January, and it was drizzling then. On my way to college, there comes an unpaved road which got muddy due to rain. On my way to that road, I found a lady who was stopping me and asked me to drop her at some nearby distance as it was getting difficult for her to walk on the slippery road. She was dressed in a white sari, which seemed to be glowing in the dark. Her face was partially covered by her palu, but I could see her big, brown eyes that looked straight at me. I felt uneasy, but I thought it was just because of the weather and the situation. So, I agreed to drop her, and she sat behind me. As we moved forward, I noticed that she was holding my waist tightly, and I could feel her breath on my neck. It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore it. We reached the destination, and as she got off, she handed me a piece of paper with an address written on it. She asked me to come to that place in the evening, and then she disappeared into the fog. I didn't know what to make of it, but I tried to focus on my exam. Later that day, after the exam, I remembered the piece of paper and decided to go to the address. As I arrived, I found that it was an old, abandoned building that seemed to be haunted. I got a strange feeling in my gut, but I brushed it off and went inside. As I walked around, I heard a soft whisper coming from the corner of the room. I turned around, and to my horror, I saw the same woman from earlier standing there, dressed in her white sari. Her eyes were fixed on me, and I felt like I was frozen in place. I tried to run, but I couldn't move my feet. She came closer, and I could see that her face was now completely covered by the palu. Suddenly, she lifted her arm and pointed towards a dark corner of the room. I looked in that direction, and what I saw there still gives me nightmares. There was a figure, or something, that was barely visible in the darkness. It was moving slowly towards me, and as it came closer, I realized that it was a ghost. It had a pale face, hollow eyes, and it was holding a long, sharp knife. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The woman in the sari started chanting something in an unknown language, and the ghostly figure became more aggressive. I was trapped, and I thought I was going to die. But then, suddenly, the woman stopped chanting, and everything went silent. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying on the ground outside the building. It was already dark, and there was nobody around. I got up and tried to make sense of what had just happened. I realized that the piece of paper with the address was gone, and so was the woman in the sari. I went home, and I never told anyone about what had happened. But every time I drive past that abandoned building, I can still feel the fear and the chill running down my spine. It has been years since that incident, but it still haunts me to this day. I later found out that the building was once owned by a rich family who had a daughter who died under mysterious circumstances. She was said to have been a victim of a brutal murder, and her body was never found. Some say that her ghost still lingers in the building, seeking revenge for her untimely death. From that day on, I always avoided that unpaved road and never picked up any stranger on my way to college. I learned the hard way that some things are better left alone, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. As for the woman in the sari, I never saw her again, and I hope that I never will. This was 9 years ago when she started college. She was 19 years young and new in town. She lived in a student's flat. These aren't like dorms where college students gather in one building. We don't really have dorms here in Denmark, but instead we have old flats cheap for rent, which are quite popular among students. The flat was located on the 3rd floor of an old building. The flat was small, but it was enough for her. She had a small room and shared the bathroom and the kitchen with her flatmate, another young woman who was also a student. The first few weeks went by smoothly, but then she started to notice strange things happening in the flat. It started with small things, like her belongings being moved or misplaced. She thought it was just her flatmate playing pranks on her, but soon things escalated. She started hearing strange noises at night, like someone was walking in the flat even though she was the only one there. She also heard whispering voices that seemed to be coming from nowhere. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, but the noises continued. One night, she woke up to find her room completely dark, even though she always left a small night light on. She tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't work. She then heard a faint tapping sound coming from the other side of the room. She couldn't see anything, but she felt like there was someone or something in the room with her. She started to feel scared and uneasy, and decided to leave the flat for the night. She went to a friend's place and stayed there until morning. When she returned to the flat, everything seemed normal again. But things only got worse from there. She started having nightmares every night and waking up to find scratches on her body. She also started seeing strange figures in the flat, shadows that seemed to move on their own. She tried to tell her flatmate about it, but the flatmate didn't believe her. She started to feel like she was going crazy and considered moving out of the flat. One night, when she was alone in the flat, she heard a loud banging on the door. She hesitated to open it, but the banging continued. She finally opened the door to find a figure standing in front of her. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, with long hair and a pale face. The woman stared at her with empty eyes, and then disappeared. She screamed and ran out of the flat, never to return again. She later found out that the flat was built on the site of an old graveyard, and that many people had reported strange occurrences in the building. She still has nightmares about the haunted flat, and warns others never to stay there.